Well, thank you, everyone, and welcome to Fanbase Press's exclusive panel discussing Retrospective on the 30th anniversary of Batman vs. Predator. My name is Bryant Dillon. I'm president and co-founder of Fanbase Press and your moderator for this discussion. And of course, before we dive in, I definitely want to introduce our fantastic panelists. First up, of course, we've got Dave Gibbons. He's a legendary comic artist, writer, and sometimes letterer, known for his work on iconic comic book titles like Watchmen, Give Me Liberty, Superior, and many more, including, of course, what is the discussion topic today, serving as writer for Batman vs. Predator. Dave, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. As I said before, I'm thrilled that you're so interested in something that I wrote 30 years ago.
Oh, definitely one of my favorites, and I'm sure for our other panelists they feel the same. Next up, we have Stephen Prince. He's a comic book writer and artist known for his work on titles like Monster MATADOR and the webcomic UNEMPLOYANT. Stephen has also managed and developed toy lines and animation projects for Puppy in My Pocket, Stink Blasters, and Power Bugs. Stephen, thank you for joining us as well.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, we have Matt Corrigan. He's co-host of the LAUNCHPAD Podcast, a show that covers the best of pop culture, including comics, movies, toys, and more. Matt is also a practical special effects artist for films like Frank Miller's 300, Batman v Superman, and Ghost Rider. And finally, and perhaps most importantly for our discussion, Matt is the owner of original interior art from Batman vs. Predator, as well as the original painting used for the wraparound cover. Matt, welcome to the conversation.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here with you guys.
Excellent. Well, before we just dive into the discussion, I do want to briefly catch people up who might be unfamiliar with Batman vs. Predator. This was released in 1991. It's a 3-issue comic book series that sees the titular extraterrestrial hunter in town with a few days to kill. Except this time, the town happens to be the city of Gotham, with the biggest game being the Dark Knight himself. It's co-published by both DC Comics and Dark Horse Comics, and the Eisner Award-winning comic series featured a notably impressive creative team. Of course, as previously mentioned, the series was written by our wonderful panelist, Dave Gibbons, but it was also penciled and inked by Andy and Adam Kubert, sons of the legendary Joe Kubert and comic book icons in their own right. It featured colors by Sherilyn Van Valkenburg and was edited by Diana Schutz and Denny O'Neil and graced with cover art by Chris Warner. So a really fantastic team. I do want to, obviously, given that we have the writer of Batman vs. Predator with us today, I think it seems only appropriate to start by asking Dave, how did you end up getting involved with this DC Dark Horse crossover? And are you willing to share some of the standout memories from the experience writing this title?
Yeah, I mean, it was at a time in my career where I'd just come off doing Watchmen, and I was working with Frank Miller on Give Me Liberty. And so I think, my name had a certain amount of what they call marquee value, that people will have heard of me. And I think maybe the publisher's thinking is that they'll see my name and think, oh, this is going to be just like Watchmen, which we really loved. Of course, that's not quite true, but it doesn't hurt having something like that amongst your accomplishments. And I was on very good terms both with DC Comics and with Dark Horse as well. And I must have mentioned to them that I was really keen to sort of do some writing, because when I was growing up, I was never aware that you had a writer and a separate artist. I thought one guy did the whole thing. And my dream of being a comic book artist was to write as well as draw. And so I think that that's stuck in their mind. And I got offered a couple of things from DC, but Dark Horse, I think, were instrumental in saying, hey, we could do a Batman Predator crossover. That might be, it's a kind of finite series and 2 well-known characters should sell very well. And originally the artist was going to be Jeff Darrow, who did Hard Boiled and Rusty the Boy Robot, for the Dark Horse, written by Frank Miller. It would have been great if he had drawn it, but to be honest with you, I doubt whether he'd have finished even yet if he had drawn it, because, it was in hyper detail. so I was really thrilled to get the Kubert brothers, because they weren't as well known at that time. They hadn't done X-Men or anything, but they clearly were major talents and had inherited a lot of that from their dad. And they had the perfect kind of feel for the sort of kind of savage nature of the story that I had in mind about an alien hunter and a dark creature of the night. So they were perfect for it. Sherilyn von Valkenburg as well was a kind of a wild card. I hadn't really been aware of her, but she brought so much to it with a lovely painterly feel to the colors. And I knew Diana Schutz to be a wonderful editor from other things that I'd done that she'd edited. So thrilled to be working with her. And the legendary Denny O'Neil as well,
Right.
who, to be honest with you, was kind of hands off. He was a very wise man, Denny, and he never did more work than he had to do. And I think he could see that the thing was in good hands with us and with Diana overseeing it editorially. And I proposed the story, and they seemed to like what I came up with, and we were off to the races.
And so they gave you a lot of freedom to sort of pitch whatever you wanted to. It was just the concept, and you got to sort of pitch whatever plot you thought was appropriate.
Yeah, and I mean, the plot that I had in mind, it seemed fairly elementary to me. You
Sure.
know, you've got the Predator who hunts people down and kills them, and you've got Batman who protects people from being hunted down and killed. So I mean, it's the perfect thing.
Sure.
And none of the Predator movies at that time, I think there were only two Predator movies, had shown any great subtlety of characterization. So I knew that I could be really basic about what drove the Predator and about what kind of character he had, which it anyway was kind of alien and foreign to us. It was enough to know that he just wanted to kill the most powerful prey. So that was really what I suggested. And it was kind of a classic 3-act structure, which fitted perfectly across 3 books. You know, they meet, our hero seems to be defeated. Oh no, the evil is running amok. What's going to happen? Our hero's back. Our hero defeats the evil. So it had a really simple structure to it that I thought was appropriate for the kind of story we were telling.
Now, Matt and Stephen, I assume, I know we've all stepped into the creator roles in various ways since, but I assume that both of you were comic readers, as I was at the time that this was coming out. Looking back at Batman vs. Predator 30 years later, after its original release, what stands out to you most regarding your memories of first reading or even just hearing about this concept or this crossover at the time?
I was just probably really getting into comics at the time, and I saw Predator, I think, when I was 9 or 10 years old, and it's a movie that's like ingrained in my DNA. And I remember seeing that cover, the painted cover, the Arthur Sidem cover with the Batman and the Predator, and it was just like that immediately drew me in, and the artwork. By the Kuberts, I think, like Dave said, that was probably when they really kind of like exploded on the scene, and there was just such a mood to it, and it felt like a Batman story, but it also felt like a Predator story, and the colors, I think, added a lot to that. It felt like, I remember the opening scene with the boxing match, the yellows. It just felt like hot and sweaty and just like gritty, you know, like a Predator and Batman movie. It was just like a perfect pairing. So
how about for you, Matt?
I actually was late to the comics game in my life, but as a kid, I collected specifically Predator comics because of how much I love the movie. So for me, the comics was just to get more into the mythos of Predator because I wanted more. So when my parents would give me the allowance that I probably didn't deserve, I would sneak to the comic shop and I just flip through the P bin until I got to Predator, and whatever they had that I didn't already own, I would get. And I very rarely got like a full, series. And I remember picking up one of the Arthur Sidem painted covers, and it was the Predator one. So it was the Predator, and it said Batman versus Predator. And I read it twice and was like, wait, what? Batman? And I looked at it and I was like, this exists? And I remember being like, this is going to be before I even opened it, I was like, this is going to be the best one ever. And it was only 3 issues. So I was able, and I knew it was coming out because I got on the first one. So I hit that comic shop every so often to make sure I picked it up. And it blew me away. I mean, I remember as a kid reading it and being like, this is what it would be like. You know what I mean? I knew that's what that fight would feel like. And I remember also after I knew that it was a thing, in the end of all the Dark Horse issues, there'd be solicitations for upcoming stuff, and they had the hunter or hunted promos, and it would show one character or the other. And I was on, man. Hook, line, and sinker. I was on board.
I had very similar experiences where I feel like, especially at the time, it was it seemed like a kind of event or thing that could only occur in a comic book shop. And the comic book shop was sort of this special magical place where like these adventures were already happening. And now these new exciting crossovers and possibilities were opening. These doors were opening. And this was a huge title, I think, that had influence on that, at least from my perspective as a reader. Dave, going back to you, I would love to know a little bit about how the creative team worked together, especially given that things have changed so much now that we have things like Zoom calls, video conferencing, the internet. How much interaction was there between the creative team, and what was that working relationship like for you?
Well, there was actually really no contact between me and the Kubert brothers. I wrote my scripts. I mean, it's weird. When I knew it was the Kuberts who would be drawing it, I could see the story drawn in their terms, in that kind of very distinctive Kubert way. And I knew the kind of thing that I thought they liked drawing. And I mean, I think this was the perfect vehicle for them because it had that savagery, that sort of rough, tough science fiction feel about it, and the iconic character of Batman. And I knew that they would do a great Batman, and indeed they did. And they got the chance to design some armor for him as well, which they really went to town on. But basically, I pitched the story outline to Diana Schertz. She said, fine. You know, there were a few tweaks, as there always are. Fine, do it. And I just wrote 3 full scripts and sent the 3 full scripts in, and then got the pencils back, which looked great, got the inks back, which looked even better, and then saw the final thing. And I didn't even have a phone conversation with the Kuberts. I mean, I got to meet them later, and you know, we got a chance to say how much we enjoyed each other's work and what a pleasure it was to work on this. But at the time, no, it was very, very straightforward. I don't know if it would have been any better if we'd spoken. I'm so thrilled with what they did anyway. They completely got what I was doing. And from things that I've read since, they really enjoyed drawing it. And I think that shows in the artwork as well. So it was one of those happy things where we were sort of all on the same page anyway, I think.
Definitely, it definitely does show in the artwork. And speaking of the artwork and the story itself, is there any specific moments, panels, pages that really stand out to you as either your favorite or the standout moments of the comic, in your opinion?
Well, it's funny, you know, I think most writers and artists will tell you that when they're actually working on a piece, or when they've just delivered a piece, all they can see is what's wrong with it, the things they wish they'd done better, you know, the stupid lines or the drawings that they could have spent more time on. And I actually hadn't really looked at Batman versus Predator for many, many years, but I pulled it out yesterday because I thought I should at least read it, because I know you guys know the book backwards and forwards. And I was able to read it as if I really had nothing to do with it. And this quite often happens with work you've done that you don't like at the time you've done it. You feel it could have been better. And you come across it years later and you think, oh, it's okay. Not, oh, it's brilliant, but it's okay. So I read Batman Pro, thought, that's okay. That's a pretty good yarn. That's a great fight. There's lots of jeopardy in it. There are some great spectacular scenes. I mean, there's the one where they first confront each other with Batman in his full armor on the roof of the Gotham Police Department building, you know, and it's sort of, the fight's on. This is it. And the Kuberts did a great job on that. But I like some of the quieter moments. I actually liked, I mean, I don't want to spoil the story for anybody, but when later they end up in the Batcave and Alfred comes on the scene with his trusty blunderbuss, a bit like the ones you've got on the wall. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And he says to the Predator, that's enough of that, thank you. You know, in this very British way. And I thought, yeah, that's great, because Alfred was a joy to write because he is British, so he's got that kind of slightly downplaying the drama of things that Brits have. So there was that scene. I also like the line where Batman has lured the Predator onto the Batmobile, and they're now heading for the showdown in the Batcave. And some cop says something like, "I wonder where they're going," and the other cop says, "I'm not sure, but I don't think it's to the drive-in." And I thought that's a funny line, you know. And I mean, I shouldn't really say anymore because it sounds like I'm saying, "Oh, what a wonderful writer I am," but I was genuinely thrilled that it held up very well. And and again with the visuals, because I hadn't looked at them for a long time, some of the visuals really hit me, like that rooftop scene, like the ones where there's blood everywhere. There's like ribbons of blood through the air as he's slashing people up. Really powerful stuff. So yeah, it's a mixture of the quiet moments and the really noisy moments that I think I liked.
Matt, for you, what are some of the standout moments, panels, pages, or scenes?
Prepping for this, for this specific question, I have just as many answers for this question as I do for the rest of the discussion. But I mean, I would agree with Mr. Gibbons and the stuff he said. I mean, the ribbons of blood, if you go back and look through that book, it's not as graphic as it would lead you to believe. It's like a well-edited movie. There's a lot of off-screen or just off-panel deaths where the blood is what you see, but that's kind of more visceral, right? The scene that Mr. Gibbons illustrated with Batman in full armor facing the Predator for the first time, it's beautiful visually, but the thing that gets us as action and comic fans riled up for that is because we've now went through this whole fight and this whole relationship for 2.5 issues. We are ready for that showdown, and the Kuberts visually brought what Mr. Gibbons had been writing that entire script, you know. But I think my favorite two things are not any of that flashy stuff. In issue 2, right after there's a confidant of the mafia gets killed, the Predator spreads blood all over this model of Gotham City, and that page starts with a completely long panel of a close-up of a city covered in blood, and then the next panel is the same size and the same width, but it's pulled back to reveal that it's a model. And I remember as a kid, I mean, I was 8 years old, I was 9 years old. And I read that, and I remember not understanding the word metaphor, but understanding that was a metaphor, you know? And I love when Batman, after he's gotten his ass kicked in issue 2, Alfred is nursing him, and Alfred is pulling the drapes closed, even though Batman is blind and bandaged, and you can see the pain on Alfred's face when Batman asks, "Is it a quiet night?" And he says, "Let's hope so." And you can see the bat signal as Alfred closes the curtains. And I think like that one panel might be my favorite in the entire story because it's the nuances of that character. There's a bunch of Jim Gordon stuff that's amazingly written and drawn well too. But I mean, it's so cool. It speaks so much, that one scene, you can feel it, you know?
Definitely agree about that. That panel hit me really strongly as well this time reading it. Stephen, how about for you? What stands out?
Yeah, it's a book that has a lot of moments, and a lot of them, because it was the first time these characters were put together, there were so many moments that were fresh, you know? And I'm really big on opening scenes, and I love how we're brought into the story through the boxing match. And then there's a really nice bit of storytelling where it transitions into a trailer where a guy's listening on the radio to the boxing match. And you just feel the tension, you feel like the mood. The storytelling by the Kuberts is just really well done in that scene, how the guy walks out of the trailer and his dog is dead and he's got his shotgun, and then the Predator comes out. Just a really nice moment. And then the other one that really struck out, it's a nice page turn where we first Batman, I think, beats up some mobsters or comes in through a window, and then you turn the page and the Predator is behind the Batman, just like hovering kind of over him. And you really get the sense of scale. And just as a reader, you're like, oh, wow, this is like, this isn't like an even match. Batman's really going to have his work cut out for him. And the Predator is just like towering over him. It's a really, really visually just a really cool scene.
It's an interesting thing. If I could just jump
Sure.
back in, as you know, drama is all about contrast. And to go to another Batman story very briefly, My favorite Batman story of all time is Batman Year One by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli, which is just fantastic. But that's got a scene in it. The first time you see Batman in costume, where Jim Gordon is sat on the end of the bed with his pregnant wife, and he's got this new job in Gotham, and it's awful. And he says, you know, what it's like to live in a town without hope. And then the next picture is a tiny picture. It's quite a wide picture with a little figure in a bat costume on the rooftops, and it's really quiet, but it's a huge scene because it really, you think there is hope, this tiny little sliver of hope. So, I mean, in a way, the structure of Batman versus Predator, I did take a bit of a gamble, because if you look at it, Batman is hardly in the second issue at all. The whole middle third of it, he's laid up in bed, swathed in bandages, and having very, you know, short conversations with Alfred. But that actually builds up the pressure, I think, until we get to the scene that you like, where here they are, game on, you're ready for this. The spring has been wound up and now it's going to explode, rather than every page is just, you know, I don't know, in the last Superman movie, I got sick of people being punched through walls. It was unrelenting. It was just had a break in between that, then it might have had something. So art can often be about sacrifice and doing something small to accentuate the size of something really important.
It's interesting that you bring up Batman Year One, because I was reading a piece written last year by Susanna Polo for Polygon, and she actually talked about one of the strengths of the series for her being that it does feel like, not that this is a alternate universe, not that this is an alternate story, but that like the Predator has literally dropped in on the Batman that we knew at that time in 1991, that it was established by books like Year One and Dark Knight Returns. It feels like this was just another adventure that character experienced. And she also referenced the Nightfall saga, saying that, quote, Batman vs. Predator is really about how far Bruce Wayne can push himself physically and emotionally to be the guardian he wants to be, and what Batman and his ideals mean to the people of Gotham City, end quote. So, Dave, I'd love to ask you, do you consider that to be one of the major themes that you were going for, or is there something else that comes to mind when you were tackling this project?
Well, I think one thing that was important to me is that although Batman obviously has to physically fight, he has to use more than just his weapons and his armor and his aggression. So in the first issue, he does some real bona fide detective work where he figures out where the paint slivers are coming from and knows it has to be, you know, in a junkyard. Right. And also, if I could jump back in, one of my favorite lines in there is when he sends Alfred around the junkyards to find out what's going on. And the one that Alfred identifies, he says the strangest thing from my experience was there was no dog barking. So, you know, that's the crucial thing. Aha. And we know why that dog didn't bite, because the Predator chewed it up with its claws, you know. so there was that. And the other challenge was, to me, that this thing had to happen, and it happened in established Batman continuity. But when it was finished, it was finished. It didn't affect the Batman mythos at all, other than somewhere in the depths of the Batcave was this alien Predator spear hanging up, which was his souvenir of when he saved Gotham City yet again. So I was pleased that I could play on the kind of Batcave, you know, memento idea. So I think the thing is with Batman, though, that he's had so many treatments by so many people over the years, that as long as you stick to certain things, that, you know, he is a detective, he's got a Batcave, he's got a butler, he's very brave, he's very clever, he never gives up, he's a creature of the night. As long as you stick to that, you know, it will take a lot of damage before it isn't a Batman story anymore.
Stephen, do you have anything to say in regards to what thematic elements you think are present in this story?
Yeah, I think kind of along those lines of what you had mentioned earlier. It's, you know, like a lot of hero stories, it's about pushing forward, picking yourself up when your chips are down, you know, no matter how big the challenge is. And I think that's, you know, one of the main things that attracts a lot of us to these stories is that they're inspiring in that way. Even something like Batman versus Predator, you know, it's that same theme of keep on pushing, you know. And for, you know, someone, you know, as a creative person or anyone in life, you know, when you fail, it's that sense of like, it's not over, even though you're going to be like Batman laid up for the entire issue too, you know, you can still use your wits and come back and come back for more, you know, and overcome whatever that challenge might be.
Very true. I think Predator, the original film, was one of the first films where I really saw the hero pushed to the extremes. You know, Arnold getting his ass kicked was unusual.
And it's also it's. I was talking about this with someone the other day about Predators. That it's not just like the Predator structures. They usually come in. It's always these macho guys, you know, and they're coming in with their guns and they're blasting everything, and that's what they do. But by the end of it, if they want to defeat this thing, they have to actually use their brains, you know, they have their ingenuity. That's the way they win. And that's, I think, one of the reasons that it's so perfect for Batman, because that's what Batman does. That's what he's best at. You know, if he can't beat you physically, he's going to use his wits and his knowledge to figure out a way to do it. So
very true.
In the book. So
yeah.
Matt, what are your thoughts on themes in the book?
This is like the hardest question for me to answer because I've read this book like, you know, 1,000 times. I've talked to Mr. Gibbons about it. I've talked to Diana Schutz. I've talked to Andy Kubert. Like I've explored this book so hard, but I never really pulled back and thought of the theme. But I got to agree with Steve. In the article that you mentioned by Susanna Polo, she said, quote, even a reader certain that Batman will win is asked to wonder what it will cost him to do so. And I think, you know, we've all read 1,000 comics, and that's the bread and butter of a comic, right? A hero gets knocked down, but he gets back up. But he gets his ass handed to him in this one, you know? And I don't think we see him get rocked that hard enough where this is not, like, this is impactful. And to see that, and, you know, he gets hunted at the beginning. That first issue, we know, but he doesn't. The Predator is hunting him. And Batman is never on the other side. He's never on the receiving end of that. So like Mr. Gibbons said, he's detecting, he's really doing that part of his job, but maybe he got a little complacent with some of the other stuff because his normal adversaries are not cunning like that. They're not matching him step for step with the, you know, being a shadow. And he's knocked on his ass for it. And he really has to come back. And I feel that last time I talked with Mr. Gibbons about this, he was so excited to explain how cool it was to take Batman and be like, I'm not just going to be able to punch the Predator into submission. I got to take the home court advantage. I got to use everything in a very methodical way, bring him literally back to my house where it is my element. And I think that's the thing is, like, you know, you got to get back on the horse. It doesn't matter if you get beat down. It doesn't matter if you get beat. What happens after that? Because there's always going to be somebody better. But what are you going to do about it? To me, I feel like that's the thing. I guess now as a semi-grown up is what I'm kind of taking from that.
It was, yeah, definitely an enduring theme with Batman stories about essentially about that, about endurance. You know, he continues on. He keeps coming no matter what was thrown at him. I think that's definitely present in the story. Dave, I don't know if anything was left on the cutting room floor, but was there anything you wanted to include in this story that you weren't able to due to time, space, or any other reasons?
Not really. I mean, if you go for that classic 3-act structure, it doesn't write itself, but you kind of know what beats you have to hit. And I was able to do the scenes that I wanted to do. I mean, the scenes that I've mentioned so far that I was really thrilled about at the time, that although it is just a slugfest, there is character in there. We do realize Batman's heroism. We do understand Alfred's unbending loyalty and willingness to actually get stuck into the fight, even though he's completely outclassed by Batman and the Predator. And the thing that I was really happy that I just had enough room to get in, and it probably wouldn't have been as good if I'd had more room, was at the very end, as you know, we meet a whole army of Predators.
Right.
And they come upon Batman and the Predator he's defeated. And a part of you, I hope, thinks, oh no, you know, he's beaten one Predator, but he's finished now. But of course, you then click onto the Predator code of battle, which is that they are hunters. If you fail in your hunt and you are killed or captured, then you have let the predators down. So they give him a sword and say, you know what you have to do now, buddy. So he bravely kills himself, and Batman is handed a trophy. So it illuminates, I hope, that the Predator is more than just a blood-hungry psychopath. He's actually playing to his own logical laws of combat and honor and bravery and skill. So I was really pleased that I got that in. It was probably good that I got it in very briefly at the end. It almost reminds me of the sort of thing that Kirby used to do in his monster stories, where there'd be a 10-page story and the aliens from Planet X would land on page 8 and there'd be some huge bit of action right in the last little corner of the story. So it was quite good, I think, that I had room to do that and then pay it off in a single page. And also, I thought, tie the whole thing off forever by having Batman say, when Alfred says, do you think they'll be back? And Bruce says, now they've found out what lives in Gotham, they won't be back. So I thought, right, that finishes it off. So I was quite pleased to give it that neat ending and not leave anything hanging or, you know, leave it open for a sequel. But of course, because it sold quite well, they wanted a sequel. I was offered the chance to write the sequel, but I'll be honest with you, I didn't have anything else that I thought was worth saying about it. I mean, you could have wrote the rest of the cast in, which they kind of did, but again, to me, it would dilute it.
Sure.
So, yeah, I dare say I could have come up with more stuff, but I was happy just to draw a line under it where I did.
Well, one thing I would love to ask you about is the Predator license is now transferred quite recently over from Dark Horse to Marvel. Is there a Marvel hero that, and I'll put this to all the panelists, but is there a Marvel hero that you would like to see take on the alien hunter? And what do you think a crossover like that, those could learn from Batman versus Predator, in your opinion? And Dave, go ahead and start us off.
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I've always been more of a DC guy than a Marvel guy. And I mean, the character who springs immediately to mind is Wolverine, just because he's
Sure.
kind of like the Predator. So that would be kind of an equal match. I mean, it might be quite funny to do something with, you know, Rocket Raccoon or even Doctor Strange or something. I'm sure it would almost be to come up with the most unlikely pairing, or the
Sure.
thing that would, you know, as I say, Wolverine is the obvious one. And my God, the Kubert brothers could draw the hell out of that, couldn't they? I mean, that would be like Kubert.
Oh,
yeah. I'd have to give it a little bit more thought, but it could be fun. It'd be interesting to see what happens on the other side of the fence. Yeah.
Matt,
I had an answer, but based on what he just said, Howard the Duck, right? Space alien versus space alien.
Absolutely.
Of course.
We actually, on my show, the Launchpad Podcast, we did a whole episode about Predator-verse, and it was not just limited to Marvel, but we had a bunch of different ideas. Wolverine was obviously on that list. If I can promote for a sec, check out that episode. It's a lot of fun. But one of the things we discussed a little bit there, and I won't get too into it here, but I really love Daredevil. I really love Spider-Man. And I think both of them would be good prey for the Predator because both of them have built-in mechanisms that make it real tough to sneak up on, right? Spidey's got his spider sense, and Daredevil can literally hear a heartbeat. So how would the Predator deal with those things? And I want to hear Steve's answer, but can I throw out another quandary related to this after that?
Yeah, sure thing.
Quick? Just want to hear everybody's opinion on something.
Steve, what are your thoughts?
I thought Wolverine, obviously, but he would have to not have his healing factor, because, you know, there need to be stakes, right? But also what Matt said, the one who I think would be really great would be Daredevil. Because visually, you know, the Predator has his like Predator vision, and then Daredevil has his. I think you could play a lot visually with that too, but also just it's more of a challenge too for the Predator. It's like, how do you sneak up on someone that you can't sneak up on? You know.
Sure.
And of course, imagine on Predator World the disgrace of being beaten by a blind prey.
Right. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
That would be really kind of, in their code of ethics, a really shameful thing, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
I think you should start writing that one, Mr.
I know.
Gibbons.
So
I
you've
think
got
you
your
could
pitch
get
now.
going here. Yeah.
Let me just make a note.
Well, let me ask you guys this, because this is something that we discussed in our episode and we couldn't really come to a conclusion, but we're all talking right now about superheroes, and superheroes for the most part have dual identities, right? Would the Predator understand that Peter Parker is technically kind of a different entity than Spider-Man? And if so, according to the Predator's honor code, would he hunt Peter Parker, or would he think that's off limits because of understanding Peter Parker and Spider-Man's duality?
I don't think the Predator would care. I mean, because he's hunting, so you know what I mean. I don't think, from what's like in.
You don't think Peter Parker would be kind of like, or Matt Murdock would be like out of bounds?
No, because he's still I mean, he still has those powers. He still has those skills, and that's like basically what the Predator's hunting. You know, like, you know, if I don't know.
But if it was like Shazam, is he going to go after Billy Batson?
Yeah, he kills Billy Batson.
If like a lion puts on a dress or something, or a clown wig, you know, a hunter's not going to be like, oh, well, you know, I can't, you know, hunt the lion.
I don't know. What do you guys, Bryant, Mr. Gibbons, what do you guys think?
I don't know that the Predator would differentiate between Peter Parker and Spider-Man. It would be the same kind of heat signature and whatever weird alien powers of discrimination he's got. I think he might be a bit confused, but there'd be no reason to pick out Peter Parker in a crowd. I mean, what does Peter Parker mean? With the Batman versus Predator, it's just that early on, Predator becomes aware that this figure, Batman, you know, is a tough guy. He's the toughest guy in Gotham City. Therefore, he's number one prey. And I guess if the Predator came to Marvel New York, there's so many super people floating. I mean, he'd be like a kid in a candy store, you know, or he might even have to do something where he had to figure out who was the toughest one, unless he was going to work his way up the whole army, right. You know. So that might be an interesting thing to do. But no, I think Daredevil is inspired. And I think in the way that you see Predator perceiving things with his weird heat vision or whatever, to see Daredevil doing something similar using his extra powers, I think that could really be quite interesting. So we will pitch that to Marvel. I'll take all the credit for it, pretend I've never met you guys at all, and you can interview me in a few more years and I'll tell you how I did it.
Excellent.
I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that.
I'm okay with it too. Yeah.
Good. You said it. We're being recorded, so there we go.
Yeah, I'll just add, Matt, to your query. I think I would agree. I think I don't know that the Predator would have too much of a struggle with the dual identity. I think it would not matter to them unless it was a character like somebody like Captain Marvel, Shazam, where there's a transformation. You know, if the power only is present, or the challenge is only present in a certain aspect, I think maybe the Predator might be like, oh, I'm waiting for that because, you know, that is the honorable hunt, not the easy kill. But I think those are few and far between. I do wonder if he would have some trouble with Wolverine. Everyone's mentioned his healing abilities. I wonder, like, would the Predator be interested in hunting him multiple times? You know, like he nearly kills him and then, like, you know, he heals up and the Predator comes back. But it would be interesting to see, you know, some of these characters take on the Predator. I wonder if we'll see the publisher do so going forward. One thing I do want to ask, you know, that obviously, since we're mentioning Marvel, they've sort of, you know, do the lion's share right now, but DC is not far behind. But we have an amazing wealth of comic book films being produced and released to modern audiences. And we're at a point where modern audiences, they have an increased level of pop culture awareness. You know, we no longer need origin stories with some of these characters. We're playing with time travel and multiverse. So I wonder, what are everyone's thoughts on the idea of Batman versus Predator being adapted for the silver screen? Do you think this is something that would be of interest to audiences, of interest to you, or is it something that's best left to the comic book world? Dave, we'll go to you first.
I mean, the structure, if you're talking about the story that I wrote, if it's a question of adapting that into a movie, I mean, it's got the perfect structure for a movie in that it's got that three act thing going on. And I think probably, I mean, obviously Predator has a huge fan base. I don't know how much the average person is aware of Predator these days. They're obviously aware of Batman, but I couldn't see why it shouldn't work as a movie. Of course, the joy of comics is you can come up with any mad idea and express it very, very easily. You know, it can be Batman versus Predator as easy as it could be Batman versus Joker. So there's no problem. I don't know how the logistics would work out, but there are people in Hollywood who've got my phone number. So if they want me to adapt the movie, sure.
How about for you, Stephen?
Yeah, you know, that book is a really cinematic book as well. I mean, just in terms of moments and like, you know, the structure and that, it would work. But, you know, it's kind of like, it's also one of those be careful what you wish for. You know, we all wanted an Alien Predator movie for the longest time, and we got two that we'd rather not talk about. So,
oh, it breaks my heart. You know, if they would just adapt the comic book.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, it's. I mean, and I think the story works so well as a comic. You know, it was done so well that sometimes I think it's best to leave well enough alone. You know?
Right.
And I don't think the story I wrote, if there was a film based on that, would get through unscathed, because there's all sorts of things that there aren't. I mean, there's one female character who plays a fairly important part, but it's kind of very much just focused on these two macho kind of enemies. And it would have to be broadened out a bit. I mean, I think it could be done. And visually, I'm sure it's something that that would look absolutely brilliant. You know, in fact, have I ever seen, am I imagining this? I think I may be. Has somebody on YouTube done a mashup of Batman?
There was a.
Yeah.
It was a film called a fan film called Dead End. I think it had Batman and confronting the Predator. There was aliens in as well. Yeah.
Oh, right.
It was I think it was written and produced, and of the acting and suits were made by practical special effects artists. So a lot of that was top notch, even though it was a fan film. Right. They had multiple Predator thing, looked really cool. It was really, I mean, but it was really fun. Batman Dead End.
Yeah.
Matt, what are your thoughts on this? The idea of this becoming adapted into a film?
I mean, I want to say green light because it'd be awesome, but the problem is what Mr. Gibbons said about the logistics of like make a Predator, so it's got to be either a costume or some terrible CG. You know, it's going to be an expensive. I can't imagine you couldn't find the funding for that. But to make a good movie, it has to stay as close as it can to the book, because, and not to just stroke Mr. Gibbons, but like the book is so great. It looks good. It's written well. It makes total sense. If you change it, you're moving away from that perfect creature. And I think the main way that I would explain this to Hollywood, I don't know. I mean, some people in Hollywood have my number, but Mr. Gibbons, if they call you and you want to pass along my number, I think the thing that they'd have to do is you have to make a Predator movie with Batman in it. You can't make a Batman movie with a Predator.
Sure.
And Predator in it, and not to shame it, but you'd have Batman versus Predator 3, which is fine, but it's very watered down. It's just, you know, it's more for kids. It's a fun story, but there's stakes aren't as high. The one that we're talking about, the first one, it's gritty. It's got heart. It's scary. You're worried about Batman, and the Predator's just slaughtering people. A quick thing on that, if you guys are interested, Predator 1, we know for a fact the Predator kills 10 people. Okay. For sure. Maybe more, but for sure 10. Predator 2, he definitely kills 19, that we know for sure. But if you really nitpick and say, like, there's a firefight and I don't know whose victims are who in a firefight, but he definitely kills 19 people. In the 3 issues of Batman vs. Predator, Predator kills a dog and a cat, and for sure 27 people. He might kill and he might kill an additional 16 that a character says there's 20 guys outside and Predator storms through. We know he killed X amount. We don't know if he killed the other 16, but it could be as high as that number, but it's definitely at least 27.
Wow. I love that you did the numbers on this.
What have I
Oh,
done?
so fun. That was my homework the other night. I was like, I told my wife, I'm very busy. Please don't bother me.
Wow, I had no idea, but good. Well, that's value for money as well. If you like people dying, we got the best.
That's fantastic. Well, let me ask once again. I would love to go back to Dave and just ask. Obviously, modern comic book audiences have changed. I'm sure that your approach to stories have changed. So that begs the question: if this was a story concept that you were taking on today, would you do anything differently? Was there anything that you'd approach differently given today's comic book audience?
I don't really think so. I mean, there's a limit to which you can pander to an audience, and I mean, I've been a comic fan my whole life, which is by now a long time, and I know what I want to see in a Batman story and what I want to see in a Batman versus Predator story. So that's the story I'm going to write. One of the blessings was that we were left alone. We weren't told what elements we had to put in and leave out. I think there is a slight thing in comics nowadays where there's more micromanagement goes on, that maybe a project like this wouldn't get just signed off like, yeah, let Dave and the Cubits do whatever they feel like. That maybe wouldn't happen today. And I maybe wouldn't enjoy being micromanaged on it. But in that it is a pretty classic story and a pretty classic structure. Today said, write that story. That is the way I would write it today. So yeah. And
Matt and Stephen, if this was coming out today, if you saw this in the pre-orders of preview for next week, would you have different expectations? Would there be different things that you'd want to see or expect to see in a crossover like this?
No, I mean, I'd expect that book. I think there's a reason why we're talking about it 30 years later. Is it 30 years? I don't know. Yes. But it kind of, it captured lightning in a bottle. And I think part of that too is that, Predator was so fresh at the time, and Batman was kind of like in this transition to being what it is now, just coming off the 89 film or whatever. And I think it was just a really nice moment in the evolution of both characters where they met and you're able to tell that story. I think the type of stories that are told today, the type of storytelling, or the type of Batman, the type of Predators is very different. But these are almost kind of like, the core, or like the mold of what they were before, like, 100 different hands sort of came on them and evolved it and whatever. So to me, this story it's great as it is. I would want, a similar sort of thing. And the inventiveness of, or rather the risk of having Batman sit out for an, which I doubt, they would let you do today. Right. I think just adds to it,
How about for you, Matt?
There's nothing I would want. I mean, this is what the story was. And we've talked about that. I won't keep saying how great it is, but it is great. I would expect it to be something different without being cynical, even if it was Mr. Gibbons and the Kuberts, because of how comics are made today, but also where Batman is as a character and as a franchise. Rereading it this time, I really thought about how we don't kind of get in any one character's head. The story is not told from Batman's point of view, more or less, which is interesting because most comics are told by the titular character's point of view, right? Mm-hmm. So it's pretty interesting that we're just watching the story of Gotham City. We see probably more of the Predator than we do of Batman. And I don't think that's how Batman comic books are being written right now. So I think if that book came out today, it would be structured different. I won't say better or worse, but it'd be different. And also, I mean, Batman just got married. He's not going to have time to fight an intergalactic hunter. Like, my wife wouldn't let me go out and do that kind of nonsense now.
It's very true.
Well, you don't tell her, Matt.
Oh, no, I wouldn't. That's the kind of lie that you get caught in and then you start to backtrack, right? You're like, no, that's not alien blood on my spear.
It's a little difficult to hide getting hunted by an extraterrestrial. Well, I definitely want to leave some time for each of you to let our viewers know where they can find your work. This has been a fantastic discussion. But let's go around and just give a chance for everyone to let everyone know where they are online, or where you can find, more of their work. Dave, why don't you start us off?
Well, I'm a sort of senior citizen of the comic book world at the moment, and I've drawn a load of pages and written a load of pages, and I don't do as much drawing anything like as I used to do. I do the odd commission just to keep my handy so I can still draw, but I'm involved in several things on a more kind of supervisory or consultant level, which is what I prefer these days. Unfortunately, what goes along with that is the two particular things that I am somewhat concentrated on. I can't really say anything about because they haven't been announced.
Of course.
Sorry?
I said, of course, yes.
Yeah. So and I really enjoy doing that. I was involved recently with designing a video game, a thing called Beyond a Steel Sky, which was on the App Store. The Apple App Store has done quite well. Again, the kind of thing I love doing: character design, story design, stuff like that. The big project that is going to be out next, that I actually finished writing long before this lockdown, is my autobiography. The story of my life in comics. It's a professional autobiography. It's not told in a chronological way. It's a kind of anecdotal story, which anybody who's ever bumped into me in a bar knows that I love an anecdote and I love a little story. And so I've got all my favorite stories and I've knocked them into shape, and they're all going to be in this book, which my wife is very relieved about, because now she doesn't have to sit there for the 10th time and hear me go story. I can just give them the book and say page 29, so that's going to be published hopefully in the early next year. So that's my major thing to watch out for, and no doubt when it starts to become a real thing, I'll be popping up all over the place trying to sell it.
Excellent. Well, definitely looking forward to that. Matt, where can our viewers find you online?
So we're the Launchpad Podcast. Me and my buddy Aaron McLean. We, like you said, covered a bunch of pop culture. You can find our show on all the podcatchers. Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at Launchpad Pod, and our website is launchpadpod.com. And
Stephen, how about for our viewers, where can they find you online?
You can find me at Monster Matador on all social media. It's a book I created and wrote and write, and it's drawn by an artist, Fabio Alves, who was nominated for a Ringo Award for a book called Banjax, and we're kickstarting our next book in the fall called Monster Matador Afropocalypse. And if you love Predator, you'll love this book because it's basically Predator meets zombies.
Excellent.
So check it out.
Well, I also eagerly await, I'm assuming, Monster Matador versus Predator down the road.
And our first refusal on that as well, obviously.
Right.
Excellent.
If you ever need a writing gig.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Well, I'm sure we all could, as this discussion has gone, I'm sure we all could talk about this for another hour or two. I have plenty of other questions I could ask, but unfortunately, we've run out of time. I do want to say thank you to all our panelists and to the viewers watching. Dave, Stephen, Matt, this was a fantastic discussion and a discussion close to my heart. So I really appreciate all three of you joining me for it.
Thank you. It was great.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Yeah.
That was a blast.
And I will say, as a reminder to our viewers, if you enjoyed this panel, you can go ahead and find more content like this available at fanbasepress.com, and be sure to check out our podcast, The Fanbase Weekly, for more pop culture retrospectives like this one. Once again, this has been Bryant Dillon for Fanbase Press, where we celebrate fandoms and create new ones. Thank you for your support.
Hi, I'm Marielle.
And I'm Simon.
And we're from Blue Fox Comics. Founded in 2015, we've grown to become a successful publisher of distinct, character-driven, high-quality comics and graphic novels.
From slice of life through sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and many, many more, we have genres to suit everyone of all ages. All our titles can be found on our website, bluefoxcomics.com, in both physical and digital formats, with low-cost shipping worldwide from our base in Linlithgow, Scotland.
Blue Fox Comics are very proud to sponsor Fanbase Press's 2021 virtual celebrating Fandoms Week. Have a great day.